Welcome, class. Those of you here in person, and those of you listening from beyond. Not like dead people, I mean, people that can't be here. So yes, I have for you. Look at the syllabus. We have this week. I have this lecture in person, and then I'll have one online as well. And then next week I have a lecture in person and one online. And that's it for the test. So the week after, just before Thanksgiving, we'll have an exam on chapters 10 and 11, the nervous system. So that's the plan. And then I will have, you'll have 3 online lectures on senses, on chapter 12. And then your final is going to be given during finals week. And they're getting picky about that during that time. So normally I would say, take it any time over a whole day or something like that. But to let you know, whatever the final schedule is, I don't know what time it is, or what day it is, but I think I may have to have you take it at that time. You all should be available, but just letting you know. The practical, let's see, so you should do an online central nervous system lab. You did it last week, you do it this week, do it by the end of this week. It's about the brain and spinal cord. And then over the next 2 weeks, we'll do a lab on reflexes and your senses and things like that. And then the practical will be online questions over the central nervous system lab you did online, and then all the labs that we did since last time. I think that's it. Yeah, I think we're gonna do it. So hopefully you guys are following along the nervous system, and I'm gonna give you this lecture. I kind of giving you the stuff I feel like I want to get in person, and then the stuff online, I feel like I can do that. I'm just prioritizing what I want to talk about in person. So I want to talk about this, the brain here. Yes, brain and spinal cord, that's what we're going to talk about. And again, as I mentioned, one of the most complex and difficult areas of anatomy to learn. But hopefully the physiology, you guys understand action potential, how you have excitatory and inhibitory signals, and then the nerve is going to either, depolarize or not. I mean, the axon is going to fire or not. And based on a whole bunch of synapses, right? Yeah. So did that part of it. And then you all know it can fire like 100 times a second. And the only thing that reaches your brain are an action potential, just a blip. It's always the same. It's not big, not small. And it's just up to your brain to interpret what that means when it gets a signal from a certain area of your body. Is that someone just stabbed me in the finger, or someone just touched me on the shoulder? All these things are reaching your brain in different areas, and your brain interprets or perceives what that means. Whew. But the signal it reaches is just a stupid blip. It's an action potential. It's a blip of electricity. All right, so obviously we'll talk about the anatomy here of the brain and the spinal cord. And yeah, let's just get right to it. And so obviously you know the difference between the two, right? Your brain is this big, huge organ up in your cranium, well protected by those skull bones. Beautiful. It's kind of, when you remove it from the body, like in a cadaver, they treat them separately. You embalm the body, and then you embalm the brain a little more powerful formaldehyde, because it's kind of like jello. It's kind of jello, so it's kind of moving around, trying to solidify a little bit. If you guys have played with brains in labs or various situations, in life it's even more soft. It kind of hardens when you put it in that preservative. And the spinal cord nicely protected in your vertebral canal, but not completely protected, right? Because you have those gaps where the discs are, and so, but you need that in order to have flexibility. Your spine has to be flexible and also protect that spinal cord. Yeah. And if you look at the spinal cord, I noticed a couple of things when I look at this picture. I noticed there's kind of a swelling up here in the neck, and it kind of swells down here in the lower back too. We're going to see that's because that's where the nerves go to your arms and your legs. So inside the spinal cord, you can have the cell bodies, all these motor neurons, sensory neurons. And so there's a lot of them. In the middle, like where your ribs are, you have touch where your ribs are. There's not much, but your arms and legs. In your armpit is this axial flex, all these nerves that go out to your arms. Well, that's going to affect the sensation of all your fingertips and all the motor. So there's all kinds of nerves in the armpit, really complicated. And they come off, eventually off your cervical and a little bit of your thoracic spinal cord, and they go into your armpit. Same thing in the legs. You got your big sciatic nerve and nerves in your legs. You're going to come down from the lower part. So that's why they're big there. All right, let's just start. Basically, you guys heard of meningitis. The meninges are the coatings around your brain and spinal cord. And there are 3 of them, you just need to know. The outer, the tough one is the dura mater. It means tough mother, dura mater. And it is really tough. You need a scalpel to cut it, it's super tough, and it's gonna coat on the outside of your whole brain, all the way down your spinal cord. And then arachnoid, you guys know means spiders, arachnophobia, fear of spiders. So arachnoid mater is spider webby. When you cut open the spinal cord, you cut the dura mater with a scalpel, then you pull it away, it's this little like spider webs kind of give way, and it's like, oh, it's kind of spider webby. It is, so that's that arachnoid mater. And then the pia mater means the delicate mother, that's the just coats directly on the brain and spinal cord. And they give it kind of a white shiny look when you look at the brain and spinal cord. So this is 3 meninges, dura, arachnoid, and pia mater. That's the whole brain and spinal cord. All right, and I'll show you here. So taking a look. It's a cool illustration here. So I see the dura mater up here. Yeah, really, really tough, thick, thick. Again, you can't even break it with your bare hands. I mean, it's really a tough coating around the outside. And then the arachnoid mater, these little delicate little spider webs, these little trabeculae they're called, or little girders, you know, if you're in like a parking garage, or, you know, kind of going down from the roof. And then the arachnoid mater is very delicate, and this is called the subarachnoid space. See that little space where the girders come through? So that space is going to be where the fluid is going to go. So the arachnoid mater is just underneath the dura mater. It's stuck to it, but honestly, it's not glued or tacked down. The only thing pushing against the dura mater is the pressure of that fluid. I'm giving you a lot of stuff here, but this subarachnoid space holds the fluid, the cerebrospinal fluid. Your brain is like awash in this water. And so the arachnoid mater is pushed against the dura mater by this pressure. So normally there's no space there, but they're not technically glued together. They could come apart. And then lastly, the pia mater is right on every nook and cranny of the brain itself. It covers the brain itself. And it goes in every little dive and every little called gyri and sulci, all these little grooves. And it just gives it a nice white shiny appearance. All right, so dura mater tough. And the dura mater, maybe you guys noticed up here. Yeah, we'll talk more about it. I got ahead of myself here. But here's the dura mater, here's the arachnoid, and here's the pia. And then more broadly, when you look at your head, on the outside is your scalp. And you feel your scalp, pretty thick skin, and you can move it. You only have frontalis, occipitalis muscle that goes over the top of your head here. Your head bleeds a lot too. You guys ever had a head injury? Oh my God, I think you're gonna die. What's pouring down your face, you know? Because the arteries there, when you cut it, they often gape at both ends and they bleed from both ends, so it's kind of dramatic. And you could bleed that too. And there's a lot of anastomosis, a lot of connections of arteries over your head too. So when you get a cut, you try to compress it, it kind of comes from the other side. So, yeah, so head injuries bleed quite a bit. And then this is what I wanted to show you, as I was getting ahead, is that the dura mater also it splits. So the dura mater is in the inside of the bone of the skull. Sometimes it separates into 2 parts. And it makes this little space here filled with blood called a dural sinus. So sinuses are spaces, right? The dural sinus is where the blood from your brain drains. All the venous blood, the blood that you're done with in the brain is going to drain in these dural sinuses. Or when the dura mater opens up, it splits in half, and there's a space in between it. Yep. So you have a big dural sinus right down mid-sagittally, right down your brain, where the blood gathers and the blood goes to the back and it goes down your jugular veins. So dural sinus is an opening in the dura mater where blood is taken away from the brain. See, they even say dura mater, say periosteal and meningeal. So periosteal is right on the bone. And they call this, I'm not going to call it meningeal, but that's going to come down and make a little space between them. Yeah, take a look. And then you see, see here right in the middle between the 2 hemispheres of the brain, the dura mater really comes down. We're going to see we have this like a wall that separates the 2 halves of your brain here. It comes from the dura mater. So the dura mater is covering the whole thing, and it's also making these little separations that I'll talk about, and also makes these sinuses that carry your blood. And of course, I'm going to show you histology, right? So, and here you see the dura mater, how tough it is at the top of the screen, just tough collagen fibers, right? Maybe some elastic a little bit, but super, super tough. And notice if you read up there, subdural space artifact. That means that's not real. It's just an artifact of making a slide. There's usually no space there because of the pressure of the fluid. When they made the slide, it dipped down because there wasn't any pressure. So I kind of make that point to you too. The subarachnoid space is real, man. That's where the fluid flows, the subarachnoid space. But there shouldn't be any subdural space above it. That's normally, it's this arachnoid is pushed up against the dura. And then you see brain, and you see the pia mater is the layer right on it. All right. And meningitis is when you have infection of the meninges. It can be viral or bacterial, super serious, right? You're immunized against one of them anyway. I forgot the scientific name of the one, it doesn't matter. But meningitis, if you have aversion to bright lights, or you have a stiff neck, and it can be serious. They can be transmitted in college situations in dorms because it travels quite a bit. And if you have a meningitis, can kill you, of course, because it's going to be an infection in the brain, can be really serious. So you can take that very seriously. All right, here's these separations I was talking about. And what you have is that the dura mater makes this big, here, I've showed in many different views here, it makes this wall. And it's attached anteriorly to the that crista galli. Remember that? Crista galli is this little thing up front. And that's where it attaches, and it goes back. It goes to the back of your head, and it goes out like a tent over the cerebellum. So we call this the falx cerebri. And a falx means a sickle. It's kind of like shaped like that sickle. It's kind of gets bigger in the back. And so falx cerebri is going to go and separate the right and left hemispheres of the brain. It's part of the dura mater that dives deep. All right, so you guys dissect the brain. You open it up, you pull out this wall that's separating the two hemispheres on top. And then tentorium cerebelli is kind of a big word, but it just means tent over the cerebellum. The cerebellum is this back piece of your brain. So it fits right here. I've asked that on a test, and it has been often missed question. So you guys are hearing me say it. So. Falx cerebri, tentorium cerebelli. These are walls inside of your skull that separate the brain into a couple of different compartments. Any questions? Some anatomy for you. You really see me get in there. And here's just another illustration to help you guys. The dura mater is in this light blue. It's kind of hard to see. But here's the falx cerebri. It goes right down the middle. And I bet some of you know what this little connection is between the two hemispheres just below it. Corpus callosum. They're talking to each side right there. And then here's a dural sinus on top. That's where the blood drains from your brain down this dural sinus down your neck. And it goes not only your brain, your spinal cord. So all the way down the spinal cord, you can see these layers. I'll give you an additional layer here in the spinal cord. But you can see the dura mater, super tough. And if you want to get into the spinal cord, they did this to me with my little back surgery there. Obviously, you don't want to go from the front, you want to go like from the back. And then they'll just take a saw and they'll cut the tops of those vertebrae off. A little laminectomy to take that top off. And then you have access to the spinal cord. And the first thing you see is a bunch of fat. A bunch of fat is covering it. And then you cut through the fat, you see the dura mater. If you cut the dura mater, it kind of leaks out fluid. And you don't do this in my surgery like that, but if you were to, you leak out fluid, and eventually you see the white, shiny spinal cord within. So the spinal cord with all its meninges is in the middle of that vertebral canal, but the thing is it has this fatty cushion around it, lots of fat and blood vessels around it to protect it as you guys jostle. So sure, you got the water. Oh, it's cool, pretty cool. The spinal cord is in a water bed so that it's cushioned if you guys move around. Then it's got a layer of fat between the bone and that dura mater. It's called the epidural space. It's outside the dura, between the dura and the bone. So that epidural space is a bunch of fat. If you guys got that. And the spinal cord is particularly tight up in the neck region, because it's a small hole and it's a big enlargement in the spinal cord. It's got a lot of space kind of in your thoracic region where it's kind of smaller, so there's more fat. And it's famously, you guys know when you get in childbirth, the most common type of anesthesia is an epidural. And I have a slide later talking about childbirth anesthesia, but you just get a little bit of anesthesia into this fatty area, and all the nerves that leave are going to be deadened. You can get a spinal block too. They can put it right into the cerebrospinal fluid, but that has issues. You're going to have headaches, there's a possibility of infection. All they do is put anesthesia in the fat in the epidural space. Voila, you can't feel anything for a while. All right, so you guys got it. All the layers are there, just like in the brain. Dura, and then the epidural space, the spinal cord that holds fat. All right, well, I said normally there's no space between the dura and arachnoid. They're stuck together by the pressure. Now, you've all heard of a subdural hematoma. And if you get hit in the head, and the danger with this is you may feel fine. You may seem absolutely fine. But then later, like hours later, once you go home, you're no longer, maybe you're alone. Then that pressure builds up. The bleed can be slow. And then, so if you're hit in the head, if you're in a car accident at high speed, they watch you. They say, don't let this person be alone for a while because you could pass out and die with no one there. So what happens is that you get bleeding. And subdural hematoma is where it's going to bleed between the dura and the arachnoid, where there's not normally a space, it says an artifact. And so blood will build up there, or an epidural is between the bone and the dura mater. So epidural is outside the dura, and then subdural is between the dura and the arachnoid. And there's other issues. This is usually venous blood, usually arterial blood, minor things. But the big thing I want y'all to know is that if this blood keeps pooling there, it's going to press on the brain. You're going to have more pressure in the brain, and you'll pass out, go into coma, die if it's not treated. So they'll drill a hole in your skull to release that pressure. There's other causes of intracranial pressure, but this is a real common thing. You get a subdural hematoma where it bleeds in your brain. Especially if you break the bone, the skull bone. You imagine those arteries get lacerated and you get a leak and the blood starts pooling up. And your head has nowhere to go. So any pressure in your head causes intracranial pressure, which is going to press on your brain. It's going to press on the blood supply to the brain, cut it off. So the intracranial pressure is something that's very important for your survival. Any questions? Subdural, epidural hematoma. Hematoma is just a bleed. All right. All right, now we're going to get to the cerebrospinal fluid, this fluid that's in your head. And our nervous system is hollow. We have a dorsal hollow nerve cord. And this is what it looks like. Kind of looks like a spaceship or something. We look at this green or this orange here. But these are spaces. These are spaces within your brain. Right in the middle of the brain is hollow. It's big hollow spaces, and it's filled with fluid. It's called cerebrospinal fluid, or CSF, and it's watery fluid. It's going to help cushion the brain and also going to deliver nutrients, take away waste. So it's important fluid that circulates around your head and spinal cord. So the ventricles, you need to know the anatomy of it. There's two big lateral ones. And there's a third one right here, and then a fourth one way down in your brainstem. So the two laterals are your first and second, goes left to right, who cares? And then the third ventricle is right here. It's going to be below the other two. It's right in the middle of your brain. And then there's an aqueduct, or a little tube that connects the third ventricle to the fourth ventricle. The fourth ventricle is way down by your cerebellum. Teaching you anatomy. There's not much excitement here other than to show you that's what it is right there. A couple more pictures, yeah, and I have a rotating picture that'll help too. But take a look. That's a real brain up there, looking at a sheep's brain. Where I've opened it up and we're looking inside of that space. So brains are hollow. You go in there, you stick your finger all the way in these ventricles. And in life, they'd be filled with fluid. So what do you guys think? Two big lateral ones. Then there's little holes that come to a third one right in the middle of your head. And then an aqueduct. Water carries aqueducts down to the fourth, which is way down here in front of your cerebellum. And then from there, it goes out. There's the little holes that take the water outside your head, the outside of your brain, and down your spinal cord. Here we go. These are helpful. So the big ones, the spaceships up top, are the big lateral ventricles. The third one looks like it has a hole in the middle. And in life, it's actually a bar. It's a solid bar because the blue is a space. And then you see that long, narrow aqueduct, the cerebral aqueduct, that connects it to the lowest one, which is the fourth ventricle. And the fluid is produced in these ventricles, and then it's going to, so hopefully they're all connected. If there's some kind of blockage, not good at all. Hopefully the fluid can flow, get down to that fourth one. Then there's holes that carry it around your whole head, and then to reabsorb, and then down your spinal cord, all down your spinal cord. And here's when you see an MRI, it's just highlighted so you can see the fourth one is way down here. Third is kind of in the middle. We're going to see this is called the diencephalon, the thalamus, and hypothalamus. And then the big lateral ones are big ones up top. Cool. All right. So what is this fluid? It's watery. It looks like water, maybe a little yellowish cast to it. It's thicker than water, but it's pretty watery. Here's a picture of it there. And of course, they take samples of this. If you guys suspect meningitis, they'll do a spinal tap. They'll take a sample of this. And I'm telling you, the dumb way to do it is like drill into your skull. You can get it down here in the lumbar region because the same fluid flows all the way down your spinal cord. So you might as well not go through the head if they do a spinal tap. I'll show you that. You have about 140 mils. I don't know if that means much to you. I think I chemistry 140. Okay, that's how much you have, the little tiny cup. And it's completely surrounding between your skull, your brain, and your skull. So it's in that subarachnoid space. And you always get fresh. It's not stale. It's always newly produced. I imagine it kind of like a slow river moving over your brain, goes down your spinal cord and back up. Yeah. And you have 140 at any one time. You make about 500 mils a day. So clearly it turns over over 4 times a day. So you're making new, it's never stale, like I said. So you're always making new cerebrospinal fluid. And what makes it, you guys need to know, is the choroid plexus. Like a plexus is usually a bunch of blood vessels, capillaries, and the choroid plexus produces the cerebrospinal fluid. Yeah, and it's like I say, it's a special fluid. Like they'll do tests on it. They take a spinal tap to make sure your potassium, your glucose are all fine. And then make sure there's no bacteria or blood. You don't want any of that in there. So they can tell things by taking a sample of it. But this fluid is going to wash over the whole head. It's produced, like I say, fresh all the time by the choroid plexus in the ventricles. So you want all the ducts to be open so that the fluid flows freely. And it's going to be reabsorbed at the top of your head. It's going to be produced and reabsorbed. That's how you can make fresh all the time. And I'll show you where you reabsorb it. Oh, you reabsorb it in the arachnoid granulations. So again, kind of spidery looking. I'll show you that. So it's made in the choroid plexus and it's absorbed back into the bloodstream. All right, so let's take choroid plexus first. So look at the little arrows. You can see it's made in the ventricles in the choroid plexus. The 2 big lateral ones make most of it because they're the biggest, but all the ventricles are making the fluid. It's pumping out slowly, leaking out of this choroid plexus. There's a bunch of blood vessels and special cells that make it. It's going to travel all around and all the way down your spinal cord. So if you took way down here in your lumbar region, it's the same stuff as up in the head. It went down there, it comes back up. So it's freshly made. And what it is pretty much, it's just capillaries. And then these epididymal cells, these special cells, they determine what gets into the cerebrospinal fluid. So if it's just naked capillaries, like everything will come out, flat, serum, everything. But these cells decide, what do I want in the cerebrospinal fluid? So certain amount of potassium, and calcium, and sodium, and glucose. So the choroid plexus is balls of capillaries with these epididymal cells that determine what goes into the cerebrospinal. It's a blood cerebrospinal barrier. So this is a barrier that only lets certain things into the cerebrospinal fluid. And again, they make 500 mils a day, the choroid plexus. So you're refreshing all of your fluid several times a day. All right, see that ugly picture up there? Looks like cauliflower to me from the top. That's what you're going to see up in this venous sinus up here, dural sinus, where you're going to see this is where the fluid is reabsorbed. So if you're making it constantly, you got to reabsorb it constantly. And it's going to take the fluid and bring it back into the bloodstream. So here's the cerebrospinal fluid, and it's going to put it back into the blood. So it came from the blood, it goes back to the blood, right? This is where you make this fluid, and it goes back. Yeah. And they look just like that. But we know that's where the fluid is being sucked up and put back into the blood. Now, if there's an issue, if either you don't absorb it back or you make too much, there's going to be an issue, right? It has to balance. Yes, and so if you do not have a good balance, either there's a blockage somewhere, or you're producing too much for some reason, there's a tumor, or you're not reabsorbing enough, you're going to have too much fluid or too little. Either way is bad. And if you have too much fluid produced, you're going to have what we call in the baby hydrocephalus, which means water head, right? And so because the baby's skull has those fontanelles, soft spots, if there's increased pressure in the cranium, the head swells. And you'll see pictures, even more dramatic if you Google them, hydrocephaly untreated in some parts of the world, where the head is huge because of all this pressure. I had a student in this class a few years ago that had this. She's like, oh, yeah, she just talked in the office. And she has a little shunt that was put into her head, and it went down, just opened into her abdominal cavity. And there's a little valve. So when the pressure is too high, the excess fluid just went and was just reabsorbed. So that's your little tube. Didn't even notice it. She pointed out down there. So they can fix this, of course, with a shunt that's gonna notice there's too much pressure and it will release it. But untreated parts of it. And as an adult, if you have overproduction, your skull can't enlarge, and you are going to pass out and go into a coma. So you're going to have intracranial pressure, ICP. Intracranial pressure if you, in fact, have too much production or some kind of blockage of this fluid. You can see this picture here. When the fluid builds up, you can look at an MRI, the ventricles get huge, and so the brain matter is being squished, and the blood vessels are being closed off. So the fluid has to be produced and reabsorbed the same amount so that you have the same intracranial pressure. All right. How are we doing here? 30. All right, look at the spinal cord. So this has it's part of the central nervous system. So it also has nerve cell bodies in it. All the nerves in my arms and legs, that's peripheral nervous system. Those are just wiring. Those are just going to be the axons going out. But the cell bodies of the neurons are all in my brain or my spinal cord, the middle of my spinal cord. This butterfly in the middle is going to have all the cell bodies. And this white part up here will be all the wiring going up and down. Technically, spinal cord starts at the foramen magnum when it leaves the skull, and it goes all the way down. Well, as a baby, it goes all the way down to the bottom. We're going to see, as you guys sit here today, your spinal cord is going to end around L1, L2. I know, I'll tell you about that. But it sits in here in the vertebral canal in a nice waterbed, water cushioning, and then it has epidural fat too. So pretty well protected. But you guys know one of the worst things ever is a spinal cord injury, right? So you land on your back wrong, it's this vertebrae slide and crush the spinal cord, or it's cut, or it's shot with a gun or something like that. You know that it doesn't heal. The nerves are difficult to heal, and we'll talk about that. Yeah. So yes, and you guys, it ends about L1, L2. Isn't that weird? All right, so looking at it, this is just a view of the body. You can see these, you have these enlarged regions. So the cervical region is going to be in your neck. You guys know this is the bone. So cervical, neck, thoracic region, thorax, T1 to T12. And then the lumbar region, it also gets pretty big down there with all the nerves to your leg. And then a little sacral and a tiny coccygeal, one nerve coming out there. right? So same as the bones, cervical, thoracic, lumbar, sacral, sagittal. And the spinal cord goes through and the nerves come off of that. And you need to know the cervical and lumbar enlargements are particularly big because you got tons of nerves that are going to go to your arms and your legs. All the sensation and all the motor for your arms and legs. Well, all those cell bodies got to be in the spinal cord. The spinal cord is huge up in the neck region, and all those nerves go to your arms, and the lumbar region where they go to your legs. And again, this shows you, look at the end of the spinal cord, freaking way up here, you know? Why doesn't it go to the bottom? It just stops high, I'll tell you. It's like when you're a kid and you buy a pair of jeans for a kid. The kid grows so fast that pretty soon they look like high water or whatever, where the legs are growing with the jeans on. So the deal is that with the baby, the body grows more, the spinal cord really doesn't grow as much, and so the spinal cord keeps creeping up, creeping up. So as a baby, it goes all the way down to L5, and as an adult, it stops like at L1, L2. And the nerves that used to go straight out, all of a sudden they start pointing down and down and down and down and down. So the good thing about it is that when you do a spinal tap, a lumbar puncture to get some cerebrospinal fluid, you're pretty safe below L1, L2. If you do it up in the thoracic region, you stick a needle in, you might hit the spinal cord. That's not good. But down here, you've got no chance. You go down to L4, L5, there's no spinal cord. You can hit a nerve, but you're not going to hit a spinal cord because that ended up above. So y'all should know you want to do a spinal puncture, you got to do it below L1, L2. And you can tell L4, L5, you can look at the hips, get some landmarks. I'm always amazed the first time a medical student does this is that they got to stick a needle in there. Know where to stick it, first of all. And if you're kind of in the fetal position, it stretches it out, brings the vertebrae across. You stick the needle in, you just feel until eventually it gets through the dura mater, and then some fluid should start dripping out. Drip, 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 and you collect. Got to be scary that first time. Yeah, the pressure is correct, it just drips out. If there's too much pressure, it can shoot out. Oh yeah, and then I have a couple of slides here. You guys, I'm not going to actually, well, you need to know what brain herniation is, but just some more detail, just because the scariest thing that can happen is that, I read about it, if you're doing a spinal tap and the person has really high intracranial pressure, the fluid could shoot out and their brain could suck into their brain magnum and kill them instantly. I got your attention. Yeah, it's very rare, all right, very rare, but it can happen. So you imagine all this pressure, all of a sudden you release it, it can kind of suck the brain in and it can kill you. So, dude, oh my God, every time you guys, if you have to get a lumbar puncture, you guys can do it. Thank you, Pomeroy. All right. You can ask about it, it makes you feel better. But they can go and they can check your intracranial pressure if there's any idea that it's going to happen, and they can, so then they won't do it. Yeah. So anyway, brain herniation is when a piece of your brain gets moved somewhere. So you know that cloud cerebri that separates the two hemispheres? Well, if there's a lot of pressure, part of your brain can like go to the other side, or it can come down the foramen magnum. So a herniation is something going where it doesn't belong. Like a hernia is where a piece of your intestine comes out towards your scrotum or towards your leg or out your belly button. It's a hernia, right? So brain herniation is just the brain going somewhere else. And it can happen. Yeah. And this is a little preview. You often, if your pupils are fixed, they don't move. Cranial nerve 3 is oculomotor. I'll tell you this. And it controls your pupil size. And so if there's a lot of pressure in there, it pushes on this nerve. It's kind of it has a long path, and so it can be pressed. And then you can, so that's one thing. You look at the eyes, oh my God, shine a light doesn't change. They're fixed. And so that could be a clue that you have intracranial pressure. Yeah, and like I say, they can do some tests. I'll show you one test they can do to test for your pressure before they do this. But I'm just saying here, if you have meningitis, it's so serious, they want to start your antibiotics really quickly. So even doing the CT scan might delay that treatment. So that's one thing that they think about. Again, actually, I'm not going to talk much about this. You can read this. It's cool physics, but how they can tell through your eye. Because if you look in your eye, the artery goes through your brain cavity, then it comes out into your orbit. They can do this Doppler thing. They look at the pressure with this cup. They can feel the pressure around your eyeball, and they can look at the difference in the blood before and after using Doppler radar, and they can tell the pressure. They can measure it that way. or they can look at the, they can look in there and look at the dura mater around your optic nerve, and you can see if it's being squeezed or not. So anyway, there's some cool ways they can measure your pressure indirectly like that. All right, let's get down to business now. Actually, I think this is our break time. You guys are so patient. I'm giving you a lot of stuff. Yeah, 8:37. All right, so let's go to 8:41. Take a little break, and we'll go into the spinal cord. Yeah, that works. All right, we got no time to rest. No time for any fun, talking. We got stuff to talk about here. We got the spinal cord and then the parts of the brain. Yeah, it's quite good. You guys hopefully read the chapter. It's just all laid out the same way too. So gotta learn this stuff. You learn bones and muscles. Now parts of the brain and the functions and spinal cord stuff. There's a whole major, right? Neurobiology, neuroscience. Yeah, you can study the hell out of the brain and its functioning. You can spend your whole lifetime, getting into this. But I give you the basics, the anatomy, physiology, and what direction you guys go, or this is it, and it's up to you. All right, spinal cord. You look at it, this is really colorful. The butterfly is not usually this obvious when you look at an actual specimen, but you see that butterfly in all that dark area? That's the gray matter. And the gray matter, as you guys know, means it has cell bodies in it, with the neurons, the bodies that has that substance in it, and so it's kind of grayish. And the white matter is the wiring. That is all the axons. So the axons have myelin, that fatty insulation, and it has kind of a whitish yellowish cast. So that's the difference between white and gray matter. And just to tell you, your brain is the opposite. The brain, the gray matter is on the outside, and the white matter is on the inside. And then it switches over, and then in the spinal cord, the gray matter is on the inside, the butterfly, and the white matter is on the outside. All right. So if I were to cut this anywhere on my spine, I know in this white matter is information going up and down. So a motor telling me how to move my legs, and then sensory from all my senses going back up where my joints are. So that's what's going on in the white matter, wiring going up and down. Call them ascending and descending tracks. Things going up and the things going down, the information. And in the middle is where things can happen like decision making. You've got neurons that are synapsing with each other. So we'll see some of our reflexes, like the knee reflex, make sure the hammer. This happens in the level of the spine. All right, in terms of anatomy, you can see down, so my belly's down here, anterior down here, anterior ventral, and then dorsal, or posterior to the top. There's a big kind of a fissure in the anterior part that you're here. On top's a little sulcus. The sulcus is a little groove. Like around your teeth is your sulcus. When you've been a fissure is like a big, like Grand Canyon kind of thing like that. So you can see dorsally, there's a smaller little divot than anteriorly. And then again, you guys, the gray matter, the butterfly, we call these the dorsal horns towards the back, and the bigger ventral horns are towards your belly. You'll see ventral or anterior. You guys know your belly's anterior. Yeah, and then in the middle is this little central canal. That's the hollow part. So fluid goes down there. It's a tiny hole. So not a lot of fluids going down there, but it still shows that it's hollow. And this little connection across here is called the gray commissure, this little connection right here, where the two sides connect. And that's important. Like if you step on a nail, sure, you want that leg to withdraw, but the other leg has to tense or it should fall over. So there's connections going across your spinal cord. Oh, cool. Real close up. The pink is the gray matter. So you guys see the huge neuron cell bodies? Those big nucleus. And then out here, oh, I love it. See the white matter has a W? If you look at it, those are little axons. You see, like it looks like a little dot in the middle or a clear area around it. That clear area is going to be the fatty insulation that got washed away. So each one of these is an axon, each one of these little dots. Cool. So white matter is whiter. All right, let's see. We're doing pretty good. Here's the gray commissure. It's where it's the connection between the right and left halves. I guess we're left with what leaves the spinal cord. So, at each level of your vertebrae, at each vertebrae, there's going to be nerves that leave to the right and the left, called spinal nerves. And their names are easy. It's just like T7, C6, L2. The name just like the vertebrae. So spinal nerves leave. And they go out and they make the nerves in your arms and your legs. When they actually leave the spinal cord, they have like little root bits that come off. And we talk about this being the dorsal root and the ventral root. So part of it comes off the top and the bottom. They come together to make the spinal nerve. The spinal nerves, as they come closer to your spinal cord, they branch off and they split in two. Half comes off the back and half comes off the front. It'll be the dorsal and the ventral roots. Cool. Let's see if you guys, can you see this particular illustration here? It might seem a little difficult, but this is taking a look. And this is like if I cut down my back, like I'm facing you like this. If you cut in there, you can see off the back of the spinal cord is the dorsal roots. And the ventral roots come off the front like this. And so they're going to meet together as a spinal nerve at each level. At each vertebrae, there's going to be one spinal nerve. So you guys see that? The dorsal roots come off the back. The ventral roots come off the bottom and they meet together. One little quirk of this is that when we name them, they're named by the vertebrae above them. So there's actually 8 cervical. because the first one comes off between the skull and the first bones. So just know that there's 8 cervical vertebrae. I'm sorry, there's 7 cervical vertebrae, there's 8 cervical nerves. Okay. Otherwise, there's 5 lumbar nerves, 12 thoracic. Yep. And just another illustration. So you get a view of this. You see the dorsal and the ventral, each have their roots, and they're going to meet as a spinal. Let me show you something here on the board. That'll be more, okay. Now, the deal between the dorsal and ventral root, this is so cool. The dorsal root is going to be completely sensory. And the ventral root is completely motor. Oh my God, that is so interesting. And the spinal nerve is mixed. It's going to be sensory and motor. Spinal nerve is going to be sensory motor. So a nerve to your fingertips are going to take the sensation that I feel with my fingertips and also the motor to move my hand, right? So spinal nerve is both, it's mixed. But as soon as I get to the spinal cord, they freaking separate. It's like an off-ramp where you have 2 choices. All the sensory go one way and all the motor come from the other way, and they're mixed here. So it's so cool. And then, let me just tell you this, the motor neurons, here's the cell bodies are down here. And so here's a cell body, if you watch me, here's a cell body here, and then the axon's going to come down, push all of them down the motor, and that's going to go out to your muscles, all of them like that. This is the deal, we're going to put some things together here. The sensory is going to be bringing information in, right? As soon as it gets here, it always goes north, always goes dorsal. It's going to come here. The cell bodies are in this ganglia, like this. So the ganglia is all going to be the cell bodies of the sensory neurons. They were unipolar. That's the deal. And so if you guys have extreme pain somewhere, they can't possibly fix it, they can cut the dorsal root and you'll never feel a damn thing from where the spinal nerve came from. You can still move it, but you can't feel anything, right? That's so cool. If you cut the motor nerve, it would stop all ability to move it, but you could still feel everything. So they're completely separate. Dorsal carries sensory, ventral carries motor. Yeah. And this is it. Well, I'm going to show you a reflex right next, exactly. So imagine here you step on a nail. Well, the information is going to come up your nerves in your leg to your spinal cord. It's going to come in your spinal cord. Here's the body. It's going to come in. It's going to synapse with a motor neuron that's going to make you reflexively lift your leg up from stepping on that piece of glass. So this is called a simple monosynaptic reflex in your spine. And this reflex is going to happen even if you cut your head off, because it doesn't care about the brain. It's going to happen right at the level of the spinal cord. All right, I got that piece out. All right, peace out. So exactly, sensory, everything coming in, and it can just go to the spinal cord. And of course, when that happens, there's another synapse that it's going to go and tell your brain. Your brain's going to be made aware of it, but that's later. Reflexes have to be quick. You don't have time to your brain to weigh it out. You just want it to happen over the spinal. Simple reflex are the sensory motor, like I mentioned here. If it's a longer reflex that involves your brain, it just takes longer. There's more of a delay. Here it is. I drew it for you, but here it is on the picture. So take a look at it. See if you guys have any questions. You see the sensory going into that dorsal, the one towards the north there. You see the cell bodies in the ganglia. And most commonly, it's not a direct connection, but you have the inner neuron in between to allow some kind of decision making. You know, maybe you can have other ones synapsing, but the more synapses you add, the slower the reflex. So the fastest reflex is just one synapse, sensory and motor. You step on glass, you lift your leg. Yep. You see the motor, the cell body is here in the ventral horn, and it's gonna the nerve is gonna leave and go to your muscle. Bam. Yep. And so this is like the knee-jerk reflex. We'll see if we can do this in lab. I don't know. Maybe not. Damn. I don't know. We'll see if we do this, but we got plenty of hammers and we can make this happen. And when you hit you on the patellar tendon, your quadriceps has some stretch receptors. And if you stretch them really quickly, it's going to cause this reflex. So if you hit the patellar tendon, it's going to pull in your quadriceps. It's going to cause a reflex for you to kick out. And it's good. Reflexes like this, testing them is a good way to see how your spinal cord, your nervous system is working. If you guys have an underactive or an overactive, it could mean you got some issues you can look at. But this is a quick, dirty way to look at what's happening in your spinal cord. And yeah, and indeed, you can't stop this with your mind, even if you think about it. You can actually inhibit it a little bit. Okay, I should say that, but this happens at the level of the spinal cord, so your brain's not involved. So it should happen no matter if you're thinking about it or not. Oh, then why does it happen in real life? I always wondered, like, why do we kick when you hit you in the knee? I mean, in life, if you were standing, all of a sudden you started falling, it would do the same thing, like you quickly, so it helps your posture, is the idea. And of course, another one is if you step on something, or if someone actually, if you take someone and you like poke them in the finger with a sharp object, they will instinctively pull their hand away, like reflexively. And actually, they will also, the other hand, they'll kind of punch forward. They'll kind of go forward. You can do this if people aren't expecting it. You can pinch them, they'll go like this. It's almost, and if you step on something sharp, your other leg tenses. So this actually, you can imagine, you step on something sharp, sensory comes up, the motor is going to make your quadriceps contract. No, I'm sorry, your hamstring, so you flex the knee to avoid injury, right? But you've got to tell the other leg, because if you just lifted up your leg, you would fall over, right? So a cross is a cross, and it tells your other leg to tense up at the same time. So that's pretty cool. So this reflex, you're going to reflexively lift your foot, and the other side will reflexively tense. I think of this, when someone grabs you by the arm, the other hand goes forward almost instinctively, because it crosses across. Cool. And you guys, when you're reading, the green means it's going to be activated, and the red means it's going to inhibit it. You know, so if you want to flex your knee, you've got to relax the quadriceps. If they both tense, nothing's going to happen. All right, there's all kinds of reflexes. And you guys have babies or something like that, the pediatricians, they do all these reflexes to make sure they're okay. All kinds of stuff. You stroke the cheek of the baby, it should turn its head. If you take its, oh no, this is for adults. The adults, this reflex is called the, if you have a Babinski sign, it means that you have some spinal cord issues. Because as a baby, if you go ahead and rub a pen down their foot, their toes will go out. And then if you do it in you guys, your toes will curl in as adults. So it changes after you're a baby. And so if you see this positive Babinski sign where you stroke someone's foot and the toes go outward, it means there's a spinal cord problem. In a baby, it hasn't matured enough, and so the spinal cord, so it should do that. A corneal reflex, you touch your eye, you're going to blink, and all the tendons. Everyone does the one where you sit down and hit the knee with a hammer. But you can do it with the biceps tendon, you can hit this, and they can go like this, triceps. So any of the tendons, if you hit them rapidly, your body will should have a reflex. Yeah. Cool. All right, well, if you read the chapter, you will thank me at this point. If you haven't read the chapter, you will thank me when you read it. Because there's a section that goes through, it names all these different tracks that go up and down. I'm not going to get into that. We don't have time for that. But yeah, if you get into neuroanatomy, there's all these different tracks, which are a bunch of wiring that goes up and down, but we don't need to know this. I don't see it. You do need to know, I could ask you in the test, ascending tracks are going up and descending tracks are going down. Ascending is going to be sensory going up, descending is going to be motor going down. You know this. But when you read this chapter, do not get bogged down in all these terms. All right, well, spinal cord injuries, again, very, very serious. You know, if you have a suspected one, you should move the person and act things like that. You wait till they're nice and braced. So, you know, because that I talked about how nerves, they don't regenerate very well. They can, if they're put together right, they can regenerate and can restore nervous function. But spinal cord injuries, it's so many axons. To get those lined up, it's usually there's all kinds of research going into trying to fix this, but you know that it's will often lead to permanent paralysis, things like that. So what I want you to know, basically, is that the level of your spinal cord injury is going to dictate what part is going to be paralyzed. So if you're way up, like at C1 or C2, way up here, it's death. Because the nerves for breathing, to your diaphragm, it's too high, okay? Now, if you're down, say, at C4, I'm talking about everything below the neck. So quadriplegic means all four of your limbs. And if you're down, let's see, what do we got here? Let's see, T6. Oh, partial paralysis. So the nerves that come off to go to your arms start above them. Start like a C3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. But if you get in the middle, you're gonna have some paralysis. Okay, yeah. But anywhere in this middle here, in this thoracic region, is going to be paraplegic. The legs won't be anything. It depends what level it is. And then if it's way down here, you're going to be able to feel everything above your chest, but not your legs. So it's very simple. It's just that whatever level the injury is, everything below that, you're not going to have motor sensation. And so if you know where the nerves come off, you know exactly where the consequences are going to be. So the higher up, the more of your body is going to be affected. So what I want you to memorize, I guess I won't ask like specific, but you should know if it's up in the cervical region, it's going to be quadriplegic. You know, if it's anywhere below the cervical region, before the lumbar, it's going to be just the legs will be involved. Right. So what causes spinal cord injuries? Looks like mostly vehicle crashes and then falls, wild sports, other. And it changes how old you are too, definitely. So as you get older, sports. Okay, sports. If you're 98, I mean, it's unlikely a sporting injury you're going to car crashes. Oh, it peaks in you guys, like middle age. I thought the elder, maybe that not too fast. I don't know what's going on. Coming down here. And then falls. As you get older, it happens from falls because your balance is off. Yep. So in you guys, in the younger years, it's most likely going to be vehicle, sports, and falls are less likely. But you fall off a ladder, tree, or horse. All right. Oh my gosh! All right. Look at us, man. So spinal cord, you guys got it. It's surprisingly small when you see a human spinal cord. It's like kind of a quarter usually, pretty small. But in there, of course, is just millions of neurons. Again, some things happen at the level of the spinal cord, some reflexes, not even the brain being involved. Let's start with the brain. Now, we just start out as this tube, this hollow tube, and then this anterior part goes nuts. It starts enlarging and folding. It always has that hollow center, but it gets bigger and bigger and bigger. And it actually gets really big and actually shaves down a little bit as we develop. But it's pretty amazing. And you can see that it's highly convoluted. And the more convoluted it is, the more surface area you have. So the more neurons you can pack in there. It's like taking a sheet of paper. If you try to fit it in your head, it doesn't work. If you crumple it up, it'll fit in there. So it's by that crumpling, it gives you more surface area. And yeah, do I need to say what your brain does? You guys are using it now, hopefully, whatever you happen to be thinking about. But we'll talk about it. Your brain right now is ignoring a lot of information. My God, it's ignoring the feel of your clothes. You know, it's getting information on your blood pressure, your heartbeat, your sugar levels, all these things. But you're not aware of that. So what you're conscious of is a subset. Hopefully, it's this lecture. Hopefully, you're thinking about the brain right now, but it's difficult. And many of you think you can like text or Facebook and do other things while you listen to me, and or that you're okay texting and driving. And studies have shown that you guys are overconfident that you can do that. You think you can do both, but then when you actually test it, you can't. So just, I don't know. You guys should be paying attention now, but I just let you know, you may fool yourself, especially into thinking you can do two things at once, but you can't. You're giving up definitely information if you try to do that. So obviously it's your whole personality, your language, your math, your creativity. You have areas in the frontal lobe that make us realize consequences to our decisions. Woo! My God, yes. And memory is amazing. Of all the smells and visual and feeling and emotion, all these memories, they're stored in there in vivid color. And, But I'll also tell you, in a criminal case, the worst information, the worst evidence is eyewitness. Your mind can make up a lot of crap. Oh my God, it really can. All kinds of studies have shown that you guys fill in the gaps with your brain does, and it's not even reality. But what is reality? Reality is what you have in your mind. And all of you are different. I can't get in your heads. Holy cow. Yeah, so you get what you have from your senses and your memories, and that is your sphere. No one else can really do that. Good stuff. All right, well, down to the nuts and bolts, huh? All right, your cerebrum is this huge part on the outside that really is big in animals like us to have these abilities to have learning and higher. Birds and stuff have a lot of instinctual behaviors that they do. They're song building nests. We have instincts as well, but we have a lot of thoughts and conscious thought and complex behaviors. So basically, you guys know the bones, you know the lobes: frontal, parietal, occipital, temporal. And then there's one that's kind of hidden in there called the insular lobe. I'll show you a picture of that. And then to look inside the brain, the cerebrum covers everything. The cerebrum is huge. Your cerebellum, which means like little cerebrum, is this biggest part that's back here. That's going to be for balance, coordination. And then if you were to cut the brain in half and look in there, you're going to have an area called the diencephalon, which is right inside the cerebrum. It's part of the forebrain too. That's your thalamus, hypothalamus. And then this is the brain stem. That's where your basic functions like breathing, heartbeat, hiccuping, vomiting, sneezing, these things are all held in this deep part of your brain, this brain stem. And this is the midbrain, which isn't very interesting. And then the pons and medulla. Medulla turns into the spinal cord. Right, so there's the basic anatomy. The gray matter is on the outside. And here it's stained blue. Don't worry about that. But it's a thin layer. It's 2 to 5 millimeters of brain on the outside. It's the gray matter, all the cell bodies. Woo. And the inside of the brain is white matter. It's the whiter matter. But in the white matter, there are islands of gray matter that are in there. We call those nuclei, which is confusing because the nucleus of a cell is completely different. A nuclei in the brain is going to be a little island of gray matter that does something. Yep. And then the white matter, we talk about bundles of wiring, it's going to be tracts. So tracts would be like you can identify areas from your eyes back to your occipital lobe, like a tract. All right, the development of the brain, again, I took developmental biology in college, and it's a tough one, but looking at the brain, it's a hollow tube, and you can see there's 3 bulges that happen early on. There's 3 bulges. We call that, so eventually it's going to be forebrain, midbrain, and hindbrain. And there's fancy terms that I won't ask you in the middle, but you need to know forebrain, midbrain, and hindbrain. The forebrain is going to be the biggest part, your cerebrum, and also that diencephalon. The midbrain stays small. It's just a midbrain, little section. And the hindbrain becomes your brain stem in that cerebellum. All right, so I want you to know that. It's fascinating. Yeah. Wow. And again, they stay hollow, and realize that you have those ventricles in there too. Take a look. You guys have heard of cerebrum, cerebellum. Maybe diencephalon doesn't roll off the tongue as easily, but diencephalon is going to be part of the forebrain, right in the middle. Very important. Switching center, thalamus, hypothalamus. All right, so you have a right and left hemisphere, your cerebrum, right and left hemisphere. We'll talk about people right and left brain, but the corpus callosum is going to connect the two. Corpus callosum will be a connection between the right and left hemisphere. And then when you look at the cerebrum, it is highly convoluted. And these little ridges are called the gyri, and then the grooves are called the sulci. So gyrus and sulcus are the worms, and then the grooves. And then there's sulcus is a little groove. There's a big fissure, so like that separate the 2 hemispheres. So. There's cool collections of brains in some medical schools and some museums. This was a particular brain that it didn't have any gyrations on it, so it was just smooth. Person had serious issues mentally, but things like that happen. And this just shows you the white matter, it's orange, but the white matter's in the middle, and the gray matter's on the outside. Okay? And I can even see there's some little hints of gray matter within the white matter. These are these particular nuclei. All right, some more terms. Again, this is what your curve cloud lab is for, really, to take a look at. I'll just give it to you. This central sulcus down the middle is going to separate the frontal and parietal lobes. It actually doesn't jump out at you in the human brain, but it's kind of the most obvious group. Is called the central sulcus. It's very important because these two parts of the brain are different. And then lateral sulcus, you can like put your fingers in there and pull down the temporal lobe here. But you can see back here the occipital lobe, parietal, temporal. There's no real division here. Like there's no obvious division. That kind of together. So this longitudinal fissure right down the middle, mid-sagittally, and remember there's that felt cerebri. It's part of the dura mater that dives down the middle. And then just shows you the difference between gyri and sulci. If you guys are visual learners, you can see that the gyrus are the worms and the sulci are the grooves. Here's that corpus callosum, and it connects the two halves, the two hemispheres. And I will wow you with this fact: 4 billion impulses a second. Oh my God! It's like that means there's almost 8 billion people on Earth. That means imagine every person crossing across a bridge every 2 seconds. You know, every 2 seconds, everyone on Earth crosses a bridge. Okay, so your right and left halves are obviously talking to each other, right? Woo! Very cool. And this just shows the lobes. You guys can just look up here. You can see that's the frontal lobe up front. This will be the parietal lobe. Temporal lobes by your temples, and then occipital lobe is in the back. Yeah, if you guys learn the skull, you know these lobes. Here's the insular lobe. It's hidden. It's hidden. You gotta kind of get in there. You know the least about it because you can't really put electrodes on it, and it's kind of hidden, but you can separate out the brain. You can see it in there. So there's an insular lobe in there. It has to do with kind of putting sensations together with emotions. You know a lot. Yeah. So there's a brain. I'm holding the brain outside my head there. So this our brain, the gray matter, holds 3/4 of the neurons in our whole freaking body. So obviously your brain is the center for most of the neurons. All that higher thought, all the memory happens up there. Yes, language, personality, intelligence. Whew. And again, once you take that brain, once a person dies, it's nothing, man. No? You can't like download it with a USB, nothing. It's just a piece of fatty tissue. Right? During a life, the electricity is making circuits and causes it to do all of what the brain does. And so we have different parts of the brain. Again, this will be in your curve cloud too. I want to point out some things. The frontal lobe is important for higher thoughts, for executive function, for making decisions, for realizing consequence of behavior. So humans have a big frontal lobe, a big forehead. That's where that happens. And then the temporal lobe's over here. Hearing is there. That's not the sight ears, kind of that hearing. And then your vision is in the occipital lobe. The back. It's weird. If your eyes are in the front, occipital lobe is where you do vision. And then if we look here, we're going to have the central sulcus here. The gyri in front and behind are important. The gyri in front is for motor. The gyri behind is for senses. And I'll show you another picture of that. So I'll put that out there. Here they are, the post and pre-central gyrus. And it's so cool. The whole one in front is going to be motor. The whole behind is going to be sensor. And look at this, it shows the body where it's going to go. And so if we have someone on the operating table, we can take off their skull, we can zap different areas. We can make their leg, that's their arm, their leg, their neck twitch, because we know we can map it out. Yeah. And look, what has the most importance? Look at your face and your tongue. So expression, speech. Compared to like the back of your elbow, it gets like a little bit real estate, right? And looking at senses too, the face, the tongue, your hand. Look how big your hand is compared to like your elbow. So we have all, this is how much of your brain power is devoted to different parts of your body. The genitalia, you don't see motor because you're not moving anything, but you have a lot of senses there, right? And then lips are very important, and tongue for speech and learning how to eat things. Yeah. So that's pretty cool. to see how much of your body is devoted, your brain is devoted to different parts of your body. Now, sensory area, I know there's a lot on this slide. I'll just give it to you. I don't want to overwhelm you, but there's two areas for speech I want to give you here in person. There's an area here called Wernicke's area. Wernicke's area back here. That is where you guys come up with words and understand language, both written and spoken. So as I'm speaking here, my Wernicke's area is lighting up, coming up with these words and consonants. Now, the motor area, which I'll show you later, is up front. It's called, you need to know it's called Broca's area. Broca's area is up front in the frontal lobe, which has motor. And so that's how I know how to say things. So that is making my larynx, my lips, my tongue make words. And so there can be people that have injury to their Broca's area, and they know the word. They know this is a laser pointer, but they can't say it. It's amazing. And opposite, where they can say things, but they can't think of words. They don't understand it. And so it's completely separate. And this language area is always going to be in your dominant hemisphere. So most people will be in your left hemisphere. Your dominant hemisphere has your language. And so Wernicke's area is understanding language and be able to give commands to Broca's area that is going to have the motor to make words. So that's pretty cool, how that's completely separate. Again, visual area back in the back, occipital, temporal and auditory. Taste and smell are deep within there. Now, when you read in the book, it talks about association. Association is not motor or sensory, but it's like making decisions about things or associating them. So let's say you go home to grandma's house and you have that smell, and you're gonna associate that with memories or bad things, like you get in a car accident and then visually you see a certain kind of car and it makes you have this reaction. You're associating. So actually vision, when I see someone's face, then I can associate the face with the name. So association is putting things together. Yeah. And all areas of your brain have association areas. So back here, this is for vision. That tells my retina what I see. Association area gives meaning to it. What does that mean? What is a color? How do I say a color? What do colors mean? What does that? Yeah. So much associated with our senses. Yep, in the frontal area, complex problem solving, definitely. Yep. And then motor is going to tell me to do stuff, of course. So I talked about speech motors, Broca's area up front. There's a frontal eye field up here that is going to allow you to track items as they move. You also have senses. If you hear a sound, move your head towards it so you hear it better. Yeah. So this goes through like the basic ideas of what the different parts do. Okay. Check our time. I got 5 minutes. All right, so you have two lobes, left and right lobes of your cerebrum, and they're connected by the corpus callosum, right? Now you hear about this, like, oh, I'm more right brains, I'm more into arts and spatial awareness, or left brain, I'm more analytical kind of thing. The key is this, is that your dominant half of your brain, some people, they don't have dominant. Most people have a dominant half of your brain, is where you're going to seek language. That's always the case. Language and usually math. And then the non-dominant is going to be more association. Definitely. So like your Broca's area will be whatever your dominant half is. The other side, that same area is going to be more about, this is more about words. This is more about like what emotions are attached to the words. So your dominant hemisphere you're going to have usually is going to have language and math. Yep, so that's where you're going to see the seat of language, analytical skills, non-dominance, other things, emotional, intuitive things. Yep. And then you are conscious. I know you guys are conscious. Well, actually, I don't know about myself. I'm conscious because I have the ability to think about myself. And what is consciousness, actually? I mean, let's not get too deep here, but the perception of what passes in, again, sexist man's own mind, yeah. So basically, is your pet conscious? Or if you're unconscious, then you're not responsive to the environment. So I guess in health world, where it's most important here, we talk about it. You can have, it's a continuum, right? if you don't have any response to stimuli, you know, you're obviously very unconscious. Whew. But consciousness is something that philosophers have talked about. Yeah. All right, your memory, again, how you store your memory, we don't really know, honestly. It's going to be connections between your synapses that are going to be strengthened the more that you practice connections, and the more it facilitates it more often. But your memories can last 100 years. Like there's old people that remember things just beautifully down to what happened as a child. So it's so amazing. And important to you guys, I want you to know you have short-term memory and long-term memory. And short-term memory stays with you. Someone gives you your phone number, those circuits keep going, keep going, keep going. But unless you transfer it to long-term memory, as soon as you stop thinking about it, it goes away. You guys are familiar. So when you study, you want to take your short-term memory to long-term. Learning is learning something new, and you have to put it to memory in order to be able to use it in the future. And then almost done here. Talk about basal nuclei. Some of these are important. We'll talk about Parkinson's disease. So nuclei are in the brain. Here, I'll have 2 more slides, so just pay attention. Parkinson's disease is a disease usually in the elderly, though Michael J. Fox had it in his 40s. But you know what it looks like. You have this shaking, trembling, and then mental facilities start declining as well. And we know what happens. In one of these nuclei, you stop making dopamine. The neurons are not making this neurotransmitter. And so it's going to affect movement. So you think, oh, I know what we can do. Just give someone dopamine. That kind of works. You can give a drug that's like a precursor to dopamine, and it cures the symptoms. But damn it, our bodies react, and they make less natural dopamine. So it takes more drug for it to work, and that drug has side effects that don't pass. So we don't have a cure. We're talking about stem cells, if we can get those things to happen, but we don't know what causes it. It can be partially genetic. It can be something in the environment. Boxers, a lot of head trauma can cause it as well. So it's not completely genetic, and it's something, it's environmental is involved too. So, but there's no cure. My last slide, Alzheimer's. And my mom died of Alzheimer's, so I know a lot about it. But it's really, you guys know, it's making a bigger and bigger impact in society and the aging population. And again, there's all kinds of drug trials, all kinds of research. You know, I always kind of comes up when I see it. But it's what happens is in the brain, you get these tangles and these plaques. And one idea is maybe it's infectious. Again, we don't know. It could be an infection that causes it, or it could be something environmental. There's a slight genetic component to it. It's not completely genetic, but there's a genetic component to it as well. It's really hard to diagnose Alzheimer's because dementia and Alzheimer's is very similar. Only after death, if you do a brain biopsy, can you say for sure Alzheimer's. But dementia is a loss of cognitive function too. But eventually in Alzheimer's, your brain shrinks and shrinks and shrinks, especially the gray matter. And you're unable to remember people, and then unable to even feed yourself, and eventually, you know, just succumb to it. And like I'm saying, if you guys look at healthcare or whatever, Alzheimer's in the world, the population is increasing so much, and it's such a burden, and emotionally, but financially too. So, you know, hopefully, if we can get, you know, some kind of vaccine or cure to Alzheimer's, it would be huge. I finished, you guys. Damn it! All right, it's very good. I'll have an online lecture for you soon. Learn this stuff.